If it's Monday, it's the final countdown to debate night as Vice President Harris and former President Trump get ready to meet on the big stage for the first time tomorrow night, with the race neck and neck, according to new polling. Plus, former President Trump targets the integrity of the 2024 election, threatening to jail his political opponents while baselessly claiming the election could be stolen from him. And the fallout on Capitol Hill and beyond after a scathing new report from the Republican-led House Foreign Affairs Committee, blaming the Biden-Harris administration for the deadly and chaotic U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Gabe Gutierrez in Washington with just one day to go until the first presidential debate between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. Both campaigns setting expectations as the candidates prepare to take the stage. Tomorrow's face-off in Philadelphia will mark the first time the two have ever met in person, and it comes as polls continue to show an extremely tight race. And a new poll shows that Harris still has work to do to introduce herself to voters. The vice president, who is set to depart later this hour for Philadelphia, described her approach to the big night in an interview that aired today.
He plays from this really old and tired playbook, right, where there's no floor for him in terms of how low he will go. And we should be prepared for that. We should be prepared for the fact that he is not burdened by telling the truth. And we should be prepared for the fact that he is probably going to speak a lot of untruth.
It comes as Harris's allies play the expectations game as they prepare for an unpredictable night against an unpredictable opponent.
It will take almost superhuman focus and discipline to deal with Donald Trump in a debate. It's no ordinary proposition. Not because Donald Trump is a master of explaining policy ideas and how they're going to make people better off. It's because he's a master of taking any form or format that is on television and turning it into a show that is all about him.
Sources tell NBC News the former president spent the weekend in an extensive debate prep session focused on policy as his allies hit the airwaves, urging him to stay focused on policy.
I think that when he stays on the issues, policies, absolutely those are the winning issues. Because again, whether it's crime, whether it's the border, whether it's Israel, whether it's wars abroad, President Trump has got not only the record of having served as president and accomplishing peace in the world and prosperity at home, but he's also got policies right now that make a ton of sense for every American.
But the former president is escalating his rhetoric around false claims that the 2020 election was stolen while threatening to jail election officials and political opponents and laying the groundwork for future claims of fraud in this year's race. The former president also attacking Vice President Harris and President Biden as stupid during a rally in Wisconsin.
We're run by stupid people. Stupid people. And we found that out at the debate with Joe. How did that work out? And we're going to find it out again on Tuesday night. Is anybody going to be watching? If Comrade Kamala Harris gets 4 more years, you will be living a full-blown banana republic ruled by an anarchy and a tyranny.
And as we mentioned, all of it comes as new polling shows an extremely tight race, with Trump leading nationally by a point, according to one poll, and Harris holding a slight edge in 2 of 3 key battlegrounds in another. Harris also heads into tomorrow's debate with 28% of likely voters saying they feel like they need to learn more about her. Only 9% say the same of Trump. So now let's bring in some of our NBC News reporters. Aaron Gilchrist is following the vice president in Pittsburgh ahead of tomorrow's debate in Philadelphia. Vaughn Hilliard, of course, is covering the Trump campaign, and Shaquille Brewster is in battleground Wisconsin, talking to voters in Madison. Thank you all so much for joining me. Aaron, I want to start with you. We know the vice president has been in debate prep while in Pittsburgh. Where's her focus been?
Well, Gabe, I think some of the things you just mentioned have been a key part of her focus. And I should note that we're hearing some of the sirens and motorcycles. We expect the vice president to be leaving downtown Pittsburgh at any minute now, heading to the airport here before she goes to Philadelphia. As far as the preparation for the debate that's coming on Tuesday night, the vice president, as you noted, has been very cognizant of who she's going to be debating and the challenge that presents in former President Donald Trump, the unknowns that revolve around him. She's been preparing for the possibility of derogatory comments coming from her. Obviously, you heard from the campaign trail. He used the word stupid. He's used that several times. The vice president in that radio interview did go on to say that she does expect Donald Trump to lie. Flat out, she used the word lie on the debate stage tomorrow night. And so part of her preparation has been how to handle that, how to appear calm and presidential on stage next to him, at the same time standing up to him, calling out lies that she perceives during the course of the debate, but also articulating what she believes are some of his deficiencies, both now and when he was president several years back. The other part of what the vice president has been focused on in these debate preparations, we understand, is how she's going to give folks her vision, how she's going to lay out her vision for the country. We saw a new ad from the campaign come out yesterday that didn't mention Donald Trump, but did talk about how the vice president wants to lower costs for families, how she wants to help build up small businesses around the country. Those are the things that have been a part of the focus for her as she's been working through questions and answers here in Pittsburgh for the last 5 days.
You know, and Aaron, on that point, as we noted, more than a quarter of voters say they feel like they need to learn more about her. So is tomorrow her last best opportunity to introduce herself to voters? And what voters in particular does the campaign hope to reach?
Well, I don't think it's her last opportunity. Obviously, the window is closing between now and Election Day. There are early voting places that are going to be starting that process in the next couple of days. So the campaign is very aware of that, I think. And they understand that at this point, we're in a place where they've got to reach out to the few undecided voters that are still out there. And then they're also making an effort to reach out to folks who are in these places where they can try to drive up the margins. For example, here in the Pittsburgh area, Beaver County right next door is one that went for Donald Trump in the last 2 election cycles, and yet here we are with the vice president as she's been trying to have a presence in this western part of Pennsylvania, a state that is critically important to win in order for either of these candidates to win the election ultimately in November. And so there's an effort being made on the part of the vice president and her team to reach out to those groups in particular. That's going to continue, though, after the debate tomorrow night and the television audience that it garners. The vice president is right back on the campaign trail on Thursday, launching a bus tour that she's calling A New Way Forward that will start in North Carolina for the vice president. Then she'll move back here to Pennsylvania as her running mate Tim Walzgate will head to Michigan and Wisconsin on Thursday and Friday of this week.
Aaron Gilchrist following the vice president in Pennsylvania. Aaron, thank you so much. And I want to turn now to Vaughn Hilliard. Vaughn, sources say that Trump participated in extensive debate prep. This, of course, is a candidate who said he doesn't need it. So do we know what that prep looks like for the former president?
We are told that on Sunday he had extensive debate preparations at his Mar-a-Lago estate, which is a notable acknowledgement because typically we have seen Donald Trump here through the June debate against Joe Biden continually suggest that he didn't need to debate because either it's in your head or it's not. But we are told that there was debate preparation not only yesterday, but also that there were multiple sessions planned for today. I'm told by a top advisor to the former president that he has been working particularly on preparing to make the case to the American electorate that Kamala Harris, the current vice president, should be held accountable for, the words of the advisor, her complicity in the actions of the Biden administration the last 3.5 years, and that in no way was she a bystander. And I'm also told that Donald Trump has been preparing for what they anticipate to be quips or one-liners or lines of attack that the current vice president may try to deploy against him, and how the Republican nominee can best respond to those attacks.
So, Vaughn, in addition to that extensive prep, if you look at Donald Trump's social media, he seems to be, focusing on other things as well. Is the campaign worried how a grievance-focused Donald Trump might play with voters tomorrow?
Right. This is one where you have not seen campaign advisors or allies really in recent be vocal in telling Donald Trump to stay away from these sort of threats of how he could potentially use a second administration and a Department of Justice to go after his political rivals. Over the last 2 weeks, as you noted, it's been clearly at the forefront of his mind. He has posted images on his social media account of AI images of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, and others in orange jumpsuits this week, weekend, he posted a social media post in which he warned that anybody engaged in what he alleges to be unlawful acts pertaining to the 2024 election, whether it be donors or strategists or local elections officials, should expect to be prosecuted to the fullest extent, which would include long prison sentences. So clearly, Donald Trump, it's more than just the debate on his mind, but clearly a retribution to a certain extent is a focus point for him in these closing 2 months before the election.
And Vaughn, Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, he'll be in the spin room. So he's often been put in this role this summer of explaining the former president's comments. What's your take on him heading to Philadelphia?
Absolutely. It's not too much unlike the role that we saw Mike Pence play 8 years ago. And sometimes Donald Trump, like in the ways in which he's calling to go after his political enemies, you have Mike Pence, or now you have J.D. Vance, you could say polishing those statements a little bit more in an effort to make them more acceptable or palatable to a greater swath of the electorate who may be turned off by that divisiveness and those sorts of attacks. And so for J.D. Vance, you know, if you're looking at child care policy, for instance, Donald Trump sort of stumbled his way through an answer when asked about child care policy last week at the New York Economic Club. But J.D. Vance himself, while being the vice presidential running mate, has openly touted his own policy of saying that families should have a $5,000 child care tax credit. And we've not seen Donald Trump signed on to it, but he's tried to push forward some policies on behalf of the ticket, sometimes when his own running mate, Donald Trump, is not the quickest to offer them himself. Gabe.
Vaughn Hilliard covering the Trump campaign. Vaughn, thanks so much. And Shaquille Brewster is in Wisconsin now. I want to turn to him. Shaq, you're in Madison, a key part of a key state for Democrats. What have you heard from folks on the ground there ahead of tomorrow's debate?
Well, when you talk to students, they say they are really feeling the pressure, and that is especially the case here in Madison. You know, young voters have been really at the center of this push by Democrats to boost turnout, to boost energy here across the state of Wisconsin. And it's so much so that you have Republicans here warning that what they're seeing in Dane County is going to be a problem for Donald Trump and for Republicans going forward. But I want you to look at how the Harris campaign is already pulling out all the stops to extend what's been a winning streak.
The rush back to college campuses
also, if you guys are planning on voting, feel free to fill out our pledge to vote.
Is also a race to mobilize new voters in battleground Wisconsin, where both sides know every vote matters.
It's like if I walk, like I'll probably be stopped by some table, and like there's someone there telling people to like register to vote.
It's Austin Reynoso's sole job. A paid campus organizer already launching volunteers across the state's college and even high school campuses.
What is the goal of the Democratic Party here?
The goal is to get everybody registered and everybody voting blue in November.
The Harris campaign says it's investing heavily in young voters, especially here in Madison, working to lock in a critical trend.
Not just tabling, not just high traffic canvassing, but getting out in the community and building those relations in the community to get everybody around the campus ready to vote.
Home to the state capital, Dane County is the fastest growing county in Wisconsin since 2020, a progressive area with not just blowout margins for Democrats, but where turnout far outpaces the rest of the state, 89% in 2020, 80% in 2022.
It's a concern for Republicans.
Barry Burden is the director of UW-Madison's Elections Research Center.
The growth here just seems unstoppable in terms of population growth, but also support for the Democrats. And Republicans have to find more votes to make up that difference.
A problem that Republicans have mitigated with big margins in rural areas.
Those are very important areas for us.
But has the county's Republican chair pleading for more attention.
The Democrats in Wisconsin have one of the best turnout operations of any state party in the country, and they zero in on Dane County. The Republicans have left a void for so long. It's time for us to come back home, reinvest. We just have to get that extra percentage point or two.
How do you do that?
We go after the low propensity Republicans, and we go after the swing voters on the economy.
Luke Bierka says some of those voters can be found on the same campus Democrats are already blitzing.
I can tell you, as a college Republican talking to a lot of people on campus, there are a lot of young Republican voters that we can get out right now.
A battle to shift the dynamics of this key county.
You might not vote.
Might not vote, yeah.
With the youngest citizens on the front lines.
And you hear there, the pushback that you're hearing from Republicans is not that they're trying to flip this county, but really just dig into the margins that we've been seeing expand in Dane County and in this city. And by the way, here on campus, it's not just the local political parties that have been mobilizing here. We've seen the city out here registering voters. We've even seen a super PAC with the table just earlier today doing the same, trying to get these young voters mobilized and activated. Gabe?
You know, Shaq, we showed you that New York Times poll that had about 3 in 10 voters, right, saying that they feel they need to learn more about Vice President Harris. And that's compared to just about 1 in 10 feeling that way about former President Trump. Is that what you're hearing in Wisconsin?
Yeah, and that's a key thing there. You know, the phrasing in that poll was that these voters want to, or they feel the need to learn more about Vice President Harris. It doesn't say that people don't know who she is or don't know anything about her. And in a lot of conversations that I have with folks, they say, I've heard this thing about her, I've seen this policy, but I want to go back and research more. I want to analyze her positions a little bit more. I want to see how things change over the course of the campaign. One thing that we continue to watch and continue to focus on these college campuses is the impact of the war in Gaza. The fact that so many students have that sympathy toward the plight of Palestinians in Gaza. They want to see how she responds in the weeks and months to come as we head into Election Day. And I think that factors in to what you see in those numbers there, Gabe.
Shaquille Brewster, live for us in Madison, Wisconsin. Shaq, thank you so much for bringing us that reporting. And speaking of the debate, we will have special coverage of the first Harris-Trump presidential debate hosted by ABC News and streaming live right here on NBC News Now. It all kicks off tomorrow night at 8 p.m. Eastern. And as Donald Trump ramps up his conspiracy theories about election workers threatening to jail them and his political opponents, Georgia's top election official is ramping up his efforts to assure voters that the state's election will be fair and secure. Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, a Republican, is testing election equipment statewide, and he knows a thing or two about the former president's efforts to sow doubts about election results after he became a top Trump target for refusing his request to overturn Joe Biden's victory in 2020. And now in 2024, the former president's allies on Georgia's election board have approved new rules that could significantly complicate Raffensperger's job, granting local officials new powers to investigate election results, a move that could delay or even derail the certification of results. And joining me now is NBC News Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. She spoke with Raffensperger, and she joins me now. Julia, walk us through, what are some of these changes that the election boards have put into place?
Well, there's some rules that they've already passed and then some more that they're going to vote on September 20th. And we should say that there have been ethics complaints against the Republicans on the board for passing these in the first place in the manner in which they did, and there's some lawsuits from Democrats as well. In a nutshell, though, what they do is they give more discretion to county officials, local boards who have to certify their elections. Now, in the past, we didn't think that it was really up to the county whether or not they certify the results. It's up to the voters. The voters determine the results. But because of what happened in Georgia last time and the fact that there's still a lot of belief among some very conservative, if not conspiracy theorists in Georgia, who believe that it really should have gone to Trump in Georgia in 2020, there are these new rules now that would allow someone in a county to say, look, we can't certify this until we've done a, quote, reasonable inquiry. Those are the two words we're going to hear about if this becomes a major sticking point to contest the election results.
Who decide what's reasonable?
That's up it. That's very vague. It seems intentionally vague, actually. And so there's a concern that they could continue to delay certification. And Raffensperger, who I spoke to, said the longer they delay, that's more breathing room for conspiracies.
Speaking of that conversation with Raffensperger, you spoke to him last week. What was his biggest concern heading into November?
His biggest concern is that delay. If they're able to use these rules not to certify, they would be breaking a state law that says they must certify by the Monday after the election. So he's kind of teeing up for possible lawsuits. Here's what he had to say to me when I asked him about it. What is the risk of giving counties their own discretion to certify election results?
Actually, counties do not have the discretion to certify that. In the law, black letter law, it says on the Monday following election, they shall certify their elections. That is a requirement of state law.
And that trumps this new rule?
That trumps because it is the law. And if you don't follow the law, you'll be coming before a Superior Court judge.
Do you think that might happen this go-round?
I don't make predictions. I just say we are going to follow the law, and we're going to make sure every other person follows the law and does their job.
So, you know, Gabe, a big reason why we want voters and viewers to see this now is because if these two end up being issues after the election and there's a contest, we want people to have some frame of reference. It could be that everything moves forward smoothly, but it seems that he's concerned.
So you also spoke to one of the election board members, right? How does she justify all this?
Yeah, it's interesting. I spoke to a Republican there. She's kind of a rising star in the Republican Party, Janelle King, and she said that they passed these rules because they heard from local state election officials that this is what they wanted. Now, of course, it's hard to speak for everybody, but it seems that she thinks that this is going to help assuage some of the concerns from state election officials. But she says they do need to certify by Monday, even though the rule doesn't say explicitly.
And really quickly, Julia, Raffensperger, his life has changed a lot since 2020, hasn't it? How is his life now, and how has it changed?
Yeah, I mean, it was incredible to spend the day with him as he went around just trying to prove to people that their vote was secure. He has security that travels with him, and, you know, he was under a lot of threats. Yeah, into these places where he goes, if he thinks that he might encounter someone who could be a threat. His family, you know, his home, all things have really changed for him since 2020.
Julia Ainsley, NBC's Homeland Security correspondent. Julia, thank you so much. And coming up, we're live on Capitol Hill as lawmakers return from their break with just 3 weeks to make a deal to avoid a government shutdown. Plus, the Republican chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee is set to speak minutes from now about his committee's scathing new report on the Biden administration's chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. We'll have the takeaways from that report and how Democrats and the Pentagon are responding. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. House Republicans released another scathing report on the U.S.'s chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, accusing the Biden administration of watering down warnings about the deteriorating situation and failing to launch the emergency evacuation of Americans and our allies until it was too late. The more than 300-page document offers just muted criticisms of former President Trump's decision to make a deal with the Taliban, committing to a full U.S. withdrawal. During today's White House press briefing, National Security spokesman John Kirby pushed back on some of the GOP's criticisms.
Ending wars is more difficult than starting them. President Biden knew that. He acknowledged that. But it doesn't mean that the decision to end this one was wrong, or that the withdrawal wasn't conducted as professionally and as bravely as was humanly possible given the circumstances. It doesn't mean we don't grieve and mourn with the families of those whose lives were tragically taken during the withdrawal, especially at Abbey Gate on the 26th of August of that year. But now that the war is over, our nation can better focus on other pressing national security interests around the world. We would do well in all this partisan rancor over the withdrawal to remember that.
And of course, this report comes as Donald Trump and Kamala Harris prepare to take the debate stage tomorrow, and as Republicans look to tie the vice president to the tumultuous withdrawal. And joining me now is Sahil Kapoor on Capitol Hill, and Courtney Kube, of course, is at the Pentagon. Sahil, I want to start with you. What else are House Republicans saying in this report, and what's the response from Democrats been?
Hey, Gabe. Well, essentially what we're seeing is a continuation of a 3-year-old debate here on Capitol Hill since that withdrawal of U.S. troops from Afghanistan. House Republicans, as part of this investigation, did gather some new information, but nothing that seems to be fundamentally changing minds. The chairman of this House Foreign Affairs Committee, author of this report, Michael McCall, said the administration had the information to better plan for what he calls the inevitable collapse of the Afghan government, and accuses the administration of picking optics over security at every stage. Democrats dismissed this report as politically motivated. They argue that Republicans are focused on the wrong question. Take a listen to what Congressman Jason Crow told our colleague Andrea Mitchell earlier.
This is a deeply flawed partisan attack, and it's really, again, it's unfortunate because the American people deserve answers. We deserve to know the lessons learned from this 20-plus year war. This was a 20-year war. This was not a one-month war.
And the White House, for its part, says this report was based on cherry-picked facts, inaccurate characterizations, and biases. They maintain that ending the war was the right thing to do and argue that the U.S. is better off for it, Gabe.
So, Courtney, put this in perspective for us. This report minimizes the deal struck under the Trump administration with the Taliban, known as the Doha Agreement. So how does that factor in to the eventual U.S. withdrawal?
Yeah, the report is actually critical of one person who was in the Trump administration at the time who actually helped decide on the Doha agreement. That's Zalmay Khalilzad. He was the envoy to Afghanistan under the Trump administration who helped broker that deal. It's critical of his role in that, including arguing something that we have heard before, Gabe, that he didn't include in those discussions military leaders and factor in things like the potential need after a withdrawal of U.S. troops for contractors to help the Afghan military to keep up their equipment and their machines and maybe even continue some of that support role that U.S. contractors had played for 2 decades at this point. So there is some criticism in that capacity. Now, keep in mind, under the Trump administration, they brokered this deal known as the Doha Agreement that would have seen U.S. troops leaving in May of 2021. Well, President Biden came into office January of 2021. He began this process with his team to try to determine whether they should follow through with that agreement, whether they should negotiate a new one, how they should move forward. As we all know, Gabe, in April of that year, President Biden announced that U.S. troops would withdraw by September, so a later timeline than had been laid out in the Doha agreement, but he did follow through with that Doha agreement. Now, the report specifically lays blame on the Biden administration for their role in carrying out that decision, but also in the manner in which the withdrawal was undertaken. So some of the criticisms, as we heard from Sahil, is that the embassy in Kabul did not properly plan in advance, neither did the State Department, enough for the need for a large number of Americans and Afghans, at-risk Afghans, to potentially withdraw once President Biden made that decision that all U.S. troops would be out in April. They also, as we heard from Sahil, the report said that the intelligence was watered down about the security situation and how quickly it could, in fact, deteriorate, Gabe.
And, Courtney, Republicans are trying to tie the vice president to this withdrawal. It's likely to come up in tomorrow's debate. What do we know exactly about her role at that time?
So the reality is we didn't know a whole lot at the time, but since she's become the candidate, there have been more questions about her exact role in foreign policy and national security decisions. By her own admission, she says that when they were making this decision about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, she was the last person in the room, that she was very involved. We have spoken at NBC News to a number of people who were directly involved who said, look, during the talks, the discussions about what to do in spring of 2021, she was in the room, she was asking questions. Some people have described her as being sort of like a prosecutor in asking relevant and pointed questions. But at the end of the day, the decision was ultimately made by President Biden. Officials now who are close to Kamala, Vice President Harris, have said that she is supportive of the decision to withdraw. But at the end of the day, it was actually President Biden's decision, Gabe.
And, Courtney, some retired generals and admirals have actually come out and defended the vice president. Who are some of those names, and how unusual is it for the military brass to come out and weigh in on a presidential election?
So the reality is it's become more and more commonplace for retired general officers and admirals, again, after they have left military service, to engage in the political. We don't see it from everyone, but it has become more commonplace in the last decade or so. The letter that these retired generals and admirals and senior enlisted members of the military put out, though, it doesn't just identify Afghanistan. It is making a larger case that for why they say Kamala Harris is really the only person in this race who can be president, as opposed to former President Donald Trump. And they argue things like her role in supporting Ukraine before and after the invasion by Russia, her support for the U.S. continuing to oppose or work against the proliferation in China and other things. It's not just the withdrawal from Afghanistan that they cite as their belief for why she should be the next president, Gabe.
Courtney Kube for us at the Pentagon. Courtney, thank you. I want to turn now to Sahil, and I want to turn to some other things happening right now on Capitol Hill. Sahil, lawmakers are back in Washington with a looming government funding deadline. What's the status of those talks, and should we expect to see something get done before the November election?
Oh, they're going to have to try to do something before the November election, Gabe, because the government shuts down in 3 weeks if they don't act. And nobody's saying they want to shut the government down for a month between then and the election, which, of course, is early November. As for the talks and the negotiations, well, there are no talks happening right now because House Republicans have essentially chosen to go their own way and pursue a stopgap funding bill on a party line basis that would extend government funding for 6 months Democrats and attached the SAVE Act to it. That is a sweeping elections bill that would beef up proof of citizenship requirements to vote nationwide with a very short time to implement it. Democrats who control the Senate have said that is dead on arrival, and that if House Republicans go this route, then they will cause a government shutdown. And Senator Chuck Schumer, the majority leader, predicting that House Republicans would get blamed for it. So that's the situation now. The first step here is with Speaker Mike Johnson. He's decided to put this bill on the floor. Can he get the votes in the House? If so, it goes over to the Senate where it's not going to pass, and then you have the standoff. Who's going to blink first? The stakes are very high here, not just on the substance of a government shutting down, Gabe, but on the politics as well. Do Republicans really want to risk getting blamed for a shutdown just weeks before the election? Because that is usually what happens. The party that instigates these fights and demands things they can't get through the normal process ends up getting blamed by voters.
A standoff we have seen so many times before. Sahil Kapoor, live for us on Capitol Hill. Sahil, thank you. And up next, breaking news from the Justice Department. 2 alleged leaders of a transnational terrorist group have been indicted on domestic terror charges after creating a so-called kill list of government officials. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're following breaking news. The Justice Department has just charged the leaders of a transnational terrorist group with allegedly creating a kill list of federal officials in hopes of inciting a race war. According to the indictment, the hit list included a U.S. senator, a U.S. district court judge, and a former U.S. attorney general, as well as state and local officials and private leaders. The 2 leaders face more than a dozen charges, including soliciting hate crimes and conspiring to provide material to support terrorists. Now I want to turn to NBC News Justice reporter Ryan Riley. He joins me now. Hey, Ryan, who are these 2 people named in the indictment, and what are they accused of?
Yeah, so one is a woman from California. The other is an individual from Idaho. Both are a member of the sort of accelerationist white supremacist organization that was organized online on Telegrams, referred to as Terrorgram, in the way that these assaults were being encouraged, these attacks were being encouraged. Essentially, what they were trying to do was create chaos and encourage people with their same ideology to go out and attack people. And I think what's remarkable and what's notable, I think, about this indictment is that this wasn't something that the feds just came up with on their own. There was actually a lot of anti-fascist organizations and researchers that were out there that actually identified correctly, according to the feds now, one of these individuals a year and a half ago. And there's some reporting about it at the time, back in March of 2023. So this is sort of the open source intelligence, I think, that the FBI is sometimes accused of being a little bit behind on. And you have the work of these online researchers who are able to identify people using a lot of this really cool open source technology. And what we see now is that this has ultimately led to an indictment federally against that woman who was identified in California a year and a half ago, as well as this other individual. So the combined work of this open source research, as well as the powers of the FBI, really led to this outcome here.
So, Ryan, what do we know about this kill list, the supposed kill list? That, who were the intended targets and how far along was it?
Yeah, so the kill lists are redacted in the indictment, and they don't really give any really strong breadcrumbs about who those individuals were, other than saying, that there is the senator, this judge, et cetera. So I don't think we have quite a mark on that yet. I think maybe that's something that some of the anti-fascism researchers might be able to determine, because they're following a lot of these channels, so that could come out in the following days. But when it goes through the federal system, through the indictment, they typically sort of clean out those details so that there's not additional targeting of the potential victims in this case. But, the real meat and potatoes of this here ultimately is that this led to attacks. There were individuals who were inspired by this and did shout outs before, 2 attacks that happened in countries, including one on an LGBT bar. And there was also an attempted attack, or a planned attack within the United States against an energy target there.
Ryan Riley, live for us on the breaking news. Ryan, thank you. And after the break, new polling data on why tomorrow's debate could be Vice President Harris's best chance yet to introduce herself to some key voters who say they need to learn more about the Democratic nominee. The panel is next. You're watching Meet the Press Now. And welcome back. There will, of course, be a big audience watching tomorrow's presidential debate, with some tuning in to learn about a candidate who's been atop the ticket for less than 2 months. According to the New York Times Siena College poll, about 3 in 10 likely voters say they feel like they need to learn more about Vice President Harris. That number actually goes up among some key parts of her coalition. For more than half of voters under 30, as well as 4 in 10 Hispanic and black voters say they feel like they need to learn more about the vice president. And that alone could raise the stakes of tomorrow's debate for Team Harris. Joining me now is the panel. On set with me here is Susan Page, Washington bureau chief for USA Today, Cornell Belcher, Democratic pollster and NBC News political analyst, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Thank you all so much for joining us here on Meet the Press Now. Susan, I want to start with you. Look, you know debates more than most people, having moderated one. What are you looking for in this debate, and are the stakes really as high as everyone's making them out to be for Kamala Harris?
You know, I think you could hardly overstate what the stakes are, how high the stakes are for both of these candidates, because this is the debate we know we're going to have. We don't know if we'll have another one. It's going to be the biggest audience probably of the whole campaign, and it is a huge opportunity and therefore a risk for Kamala Harris to explain to voters who she is.
Yeah, and Cornell, we just put up some of those poll numbers. Looking at so many young voters, still they need to learn more about a sitting vice president. So if you're the Harris campaign, is the glass half full or half empty looking at those numbers?
Well, it's half full, but your key point was the vice president, right? the vice president is always a person in the shadows, whether it be a Democrat or Republican. They don't actually know that much about it. Like, you know, I'm still from Chuck Todd here. The vice president is the most famous unknown person in the world. So, no, I think it is an opportunity. And look, she's only been at the top of the ticket for what, a month or so. So it really is an opportunity for her to put forward sort of her vision. And I think you're going to see her tell a little bit of her biography in there as well to sort of try to connect and make herself more relatable to voters.
Do you think the Harris campaign just yesterday put up an issues portion of the website? I mean, just we're so close to the election, and now they waited this long to do it. Do you think that's part of it? Do you think that the campaign knows that they have to drill down on some policy, or are they just trying to avoid it and trying to sell her personal story?
Yeah, because policy is something that we're always... The other side, especially Donald Trump, is really focused in on. He's really a policy guy.
According to sources say, he's doing extensive debate prep, apparently, over the weekend. Yeah, I don't think you're buying that very much.
No, I'm not buying it. But look, yes, where is she on the policies? What are the differences? I do think she has to stay focused on what are her policy differences and try to put some contrast. Well, it's really kind of hard to do a contrast debate with Donald Trump. As you know, he throws out a lot of things. He floods the box, so it makes it difficult.
You know, and Matt, look, do you think Vice President Harris, is she going to be on the defensive on her record here? Is Trump going to be on the attack? Or how do you see this playing out? Donald Trump, with so many voters not knowing Kamala Harris, how can he define her?
I mean, I think what we've seen, there's a template in that New York Times Siena poll, right? I think certainly what you saw all through the DNC was trying to make her the change agent, trying to make her into the mainstream. 2 red flags, but it's also an opportunity, at least this came out before the debate, so they know which way to go, is that most folks see her as at least half too liberal, and the change agent, at least right now, according to that poll, is with Donald Trump. So it gives both of them a little bit of a guide path of what they need to do going into tomorrow night.
So, Susan, Trump's last performance in the debate, it was overshadowed, obviously, by President Biden's performance. So in this debate, is there a chance with a new candidate that's 20 years younger, can he end up looking old and out of touch in this debate?
Yeah, I think that's a risk for him. I mean, this is not the candidate he thought he'd be debating, the one he was so confident that he could defeat. And in the last debate, Biden was so terrible that I think we overlooked how Trump was relatively good. You know, and part of it was the muted mic that imposed some discipline on him. That was really helpful. The mics will be muted again tomorrow night, so we'll see how much that helps him. But she's not going to be the debater that Joe Biden was. She's going to be more vigorous. She's going to She's going to respond to him in a more effective way, I would expect, in pointing out things that she says are untrue. So we'll see. I think she's a pretty confident debater. I think she was 4 years ago, and she looked pretty confident on that convention stage.
You know, Cornell, before this cycle, remember when people were saying debates didn't matter? Would you say that they matter now? I mean, Yeah, how much do they matter at this point?
You know, it's a really good question. I actually don't have a complete answer to it. I mean, I know we say that, you know, she's got a lot to lose and all this and all these people watch, but there's so few voters that are, quite frankly, in sort of in the middle of just so pull out of North Carolina, and it's a dead heat in North Carolina, and the deciding what's going to decide in North Carolina isn't going to be that 2 or 3% is undecided. It's going to be who turns out, right? It really is. And by the way, I have not seen a tied race in North Carolina at the top of the ticket since 2008 when Democrats lost won it. But yes, she has performed. But this is my one point about Donald Trump. It's like his fact checker from last time. He told over 30 lies, right? And one fact checker said he was lying on average almost like once every 100 seconds, right? So that's what she's up against too. Also, can she stay focused, or does she check his facts and try to push back his lies, or does she stay focused on her vision for the future?
You know, and Matt, to borrow from our friend Chuck Todd, since you did as well, he wrote last week that the candidate that's seen more as an agent of change will be the candidate that wins. Now, that last New York Times poll, Trump had an edge on that. Do you think that that's what voters want, an agent of change?
That's a good question. It's hard to say, right? Because we're in unprecedented times in that we have a former president and an incumbent vice president. So each has a little bit of complications on the matter, and each has a credible case to make on the matter. So it's tough to see how that goes. And look, I'll say this on debates. Look, it's one of the few things we have left in our politics, which is a great convener of not just political junkies like us around the table, but casual observers. And it can inject things into the narrative that live on for weeks on end and can start kind of a little bit of a new message narrative. I would expect that coming out tomorrow night.
We were talking about defining a candidate, and on the trail, Donald Trump has been defining a candidate, Joe Biden. Do you think he's still wasting too much time focusing on the previous candidate? Has that been a missed opportunity so far?
I don't think he's doing it as much as he did, say, 3 weeks ago, but I think, you know, I will say that. But you're right. The more we talk about Joe Biden, it's the less we talk about Kamala Harris. But as I think at least is what we're seeing both in New York Times polls, but I think also if you talk to folks in both camps, the internals are seeing in the states in particular show that this is going to be probably the closest election since Bush v. Gore. So it's not too bad.
But Joe Biden is an issue also for Kamala Harris, because if she's going to be an agent of change, and that is what voters tell us they want, she needs to differentiate herself in a bigger way from Joe Biden.
And how can she do that, Susan? How can she differentiate herself while still praising, you know, everything from, you know, the Biden administration? She seems to really want to talk about infrastructure, not so much immigration, although she's trying to flip the script on that. But how big of a challenge is that?
She needs to. It's a big challenge because she owes a lot to him, and she's been his loyal partner. But she needs to pick a couple issues on which there is some space between them.
All right, I want to play part of an ad that the Harris campaign is running on Fox News in South Florida and in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Let's listen.
In 2016, Donald Trump said he would choose only the best people to work in his White House. Now those people have a warning for America. Trump is not fit to be president again. Here's his vice president.
Anyone who puts himself over the Constitution should never be president of the United States.
His defense secretary.
Do you think Trump can be trusted with the nation's secrets ever again?
No. I mean, it's just irresponsible action that places our service members at risk, places our nation's security at risk.
Take it from the people who knew him best. Donald Trump is a danger to our troops and our democracy.
So that ad's going to be playing in Palm Beach County and in Philadelphia tomorrow, places where, I don't know, Donald Trump may be watching. Is the Harris campaign really just trying to troll him right now? Will it get under his skin?
Audience of one for that ad. And yes, I mean, you can get under Donald Trump's skin. We've discovered that. And that's the kind of thing that could be the subject of a needle that Kamala Harris could use.
And Cornell, you're about to jump in.
I hear as the audience want, but I think it's something larger here. I think when you look at its permission structure, when you look at these Republicans who've come out against him, and you look at what happened this past weekend with the Cheneys, not necessarily a progressive liberal family name, right? Like, you know, Vice President Cheney is now against him. I think this is a bigger sort of drip, and setting up a permission structure for some of those Republicans who've been sitting on the fence. And again, never, you know, not wanting to pull the lever for Trump, but not saying, you know what, I'm not a Democrat either.
No current leaders, though. No current leaders of the Republicans.
But I will say this.
What current president or even vice president from the Republicans have come out for him?
If they're that confident in their message, run in the swing states. It's kind of telling their actions are showing that they know this isn't a real real message.
I think you
She'll
will
run in
see
Palm
that.
Beach. Do it.
I'm
Go put $10 million behind it today. And I dare you. Mark Esper is a winning issue in the suburbs of North Carolina.
I'll go online online right now and say that in the next couple of weeks you're going to see the sort of Cheney stuff in ads.
Okay. So Cornell, we were looking at that ad. That is the Harris campaign trying to get under Donald Trump's skin. Do you think Kamala Harris needs to try something on that stage to get under his skin? Does she bring up court cases, for example? Dangerous for him to do it, for her to do it. But how do you think he'd react?
She's not a performer, right? And look, Donald Trump is the ultimate performer in his entertainment. But no, she has been as a prosecutor, and I think she will bring up the fact that he is a felon. Because you know what? He is a felon, like 34-time felon. So if that gets under his skin, that's one thing. But I think you will see her prosecute the case against him. But back to that point you made earlier, there's still a lot of voters that need to know about her, and I think she'll tell her story.
And Matt, really quickly, what does Donald Trump need to do tomorrow?
He needs to have, kind of like what Susan said, rely back in the prep we know he's doing. And if he can show up like he did in the first debate, I would be pretty pleased.
Matt? Susan, Cornell, thank you all so much for joining me here on the panel. Really appreciate it. Always a good conversation with this group. And we are moving to a commercial break. We'll be right back.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.